Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 94 of the On the Diamond Into the Deep podcast. As always, I am your host, Mahal, and today is Tuesday, October 28th. The time of recording is 2:42 p.m., and it is off-season for the Mariners now. We talked about it on episode 93, but the Mariners dropped Game 7 of the ALCS, and I do briefly just want to touch on that again. It's been now over a week since that happened. It was a week ago last night. And a week ago, we recorded episode 93, where we discussed sort of my reaction to the game, my reaction to the end of the season. And today, we're going to get started on off-season stuff. We will be going through different things through each week. This week, the plan is just to go through pretty much an off-season preview. Next week, I'm planning to try and get an off-season plan, my first off-season plan, up. We will get that out on Instagram after posting it, or after the next episode comes out. That'll be episode 95. So we will have an off-season plan next week. And then depending on what happens between that episode and the next one, we will potentially do another off-season plan. My plan next week is to have one that's pretty realistic and then go more realistic, or go with one that would be sort of like a dream scenario that is like not really realistic, and then one that is sort of what could happen if the Mariners miss on some targets, stuff like that. But we start today with off-season preview. So that's going to be stuff like who's gone, who I expect to be there next year, who I think they might want to re-sign, issues that they had in the playoffs, issues they had during the regular season. I'm going to have some hot takes, some random sort of possibilities that could happen. And then I'm going to go through what I think a good offseason will look like, a meh offseason, a bad offseason, a great offseason, and sort of a dream offseason with even a couple players in there. And with that, I will lay out what a roster would potentially look like with that offseason. So again, just payroll stuff, holes, issues from regular season, postseason, players that are going to be gone, players that are going to maybe be back, priority list, stuff like that. But to begin, I haven't watched much of the World Series, I'll be honest. Last night was the first time I watched any of the World Series. First pitch I saw, Teoscar Hernandez went yard. Thought that was randomly really funny, actually. But it sucks to watch because I think for myself, watching these games, knowing that the Mariners could have been there, and knowing that the Mariners could have been competitive sucks. And I think that if you had Randy Arozarena be decent, even during the postseason, I think you would have found yourself in the World Series. Some stuff didn't go your way. That happens. It's baseball. So obviously you're not there, and it was a hell of a season, an amazing season, best season in franchise history. But again, it's still disappointing. We mentioned this last week. It feels like you probably could be there, should be there. And in that way, it really does suck. But I think the farther we get away from that, the more you can remember the Geno home run moment, the Polanco walk-off home run or walk-off single moment in the 15th inning, I want to say that was. And it's not that it doesn't hurt, it doesn't suck, and it's not like I wish the season was still happening, because obviously we all wish that the Mariners were playing tonight in Game 4 of the World Series. But that's not what happened. It didn't go your way. But you're in a great spot. We talked about it last week. You have the top farm system in baseball. You have a top 10 prospect debuting next year, very likely. You have one of the best pitching prospects, two of the best pitching prospects. One of them's farther away. One of them could debut late next year in a Trey Savage type of route, if he takes that route to the majors. You have a guy that is a switch pitcher that could debut next year. You have one of the best power hitting prospects in baseball that could debut next year. You have one of the best pure hitting prospects that could debut next year in Michael Arroyo. So you have guys that are going to help from within for the first time really in a very long time, especially in terms of hitters. You've had pitchers come up and be able to contribute, but you haven't had a plethora of hitters be able to come up and contribute, and you're on the brink of that happening. So in that way, it's a chance to look forward, and I know Mariners fans don't always want to hear that because that's sort of how it always is. It's always, well, there's always next year. Well, there's this future. And at some point, you do have to sacrifice some of the future for the now. And I don't know if you're quite at that point yet, because I do think that you are still not necessarily a few years away from being a World Series contender, because I think you can be a World Series contender, if not favorite, next year, at least in the American League. But that said, I also think you are 2-3 years away from really being at your peak, assuming you can extend some of these pitchers. But I think 2027, 2028 are those years that really you could be at your best in terms of roster building type of stuff. And some of that comes with increasing payroll, stuff like that, but they're starting to increase payroll again. It sounds like they'll be at least where they ended last season at. We'll get into that a little bit later in this episode. But so far, in my opinion, since the season ended, there's been quite a lot of positives. And maybe we still need to talk about grades for guys during the season, whether that's Dan Wilson, whether that's players, GM, Jerry DiPoto, the front office, stuff like that. But overall, I think that's a very successful season. I think for me, that surpassed expectations, even though it felt like you could have done more. That said, we're now a few days away from November, and it's time to start pushing your way in through the next phase of this team, the next season of this team, and what can you do to improve your team from 2025 to 2026. And for me, that's one of my favorite things to talk about. And this episode's going to be fun to talk about, and I've had fun already this week looking at trade targets, free agent targets, and there's still a lot to do because there's by no means a completion of targets that I have found. By no means am I done looking at targets. By no means have I gone through every team, every roster, even all the free agents. By no means do I know exactly what each and every one of these guys can bring. But we can talk about them, and that part of itself is fun. And we'll start getting into targets in the middle-ish of November, I want to say. But I think the first guy on everyone's list is Josh Naylor. And transitioning here a little bit, if you want to know priorities for me, Josh Naylor is number one. We'll get into 2, 3, 4 for me after that. But Josh Naylor is priority number one, and whiffing on him would be a rough way to start this offseason. But I do feel good that they'll be able to re-sign him. I think he will be back here. That said, a year ago, I thought that Justin Turner would be back here, and we saw how that turned out. And a few years ago, I thought Carlos Santana would be back here, and we all saw how that turned out. So you never know what's going to happen in baseball, especially with the Mariners. But if I were to bet on what I think is going to happen with Naylor, my bet would be that he is back here. Moving on fully, though, let's talk about the offseason. So I just want to talk about, first off, what is going to be gone from your 2025 roster. Now, most of you probably already know this, but Mitch Garver, Jorge Polanco, Josh Naylor, Eugenio Suarez, all going to be gone. In terms of position stuff, that removes your backup catcher, your DH, your first baseman, and your third baseman from the end of the season. So obviously that's 4 holes that you already have got to fill. So with that, what is the most important of those holes? What are you going to be able to fill from inside, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Beginning with what you're going to be able to fill from the inside. Backup catcher is going to be filled by Harry Ford. I feel 100% confident in that. If they do trade him, you're going to have to go sign someone on a cheap, but it's not going to be $12 million like Mitch Garver was on. In terms of DH, that's Jorge Polanco. You could also say he's second baseman, but I think second base is going to be filled by Cole Young, and I think that unless they trade him and go get a different guy that is going to be there for a couple years and is maybe a little bit more proven, it's going to be Cole Young. And at some point, maybe Michael Arroyo plays into that a little bit, but it is going to be Cole Young, Ryan Bliss, maybe a little bit of Leo Rivas, like I said, Michael Arroyo at some point, and it's kind of going to be that crew. If you re-sign Jorge Polanco, he might mix in there a little bit too, but I'd expect him more so to be a DH. And I'd expect, and I would want this Mariners team to probably look at a guy that can consistently be sort of a DH. And whether that's a DH build type of guy necessarily, I don't know if that's where I would go with it, but maybe it's a guy that can get on base and work counts and hit for higher average and can be a leadoff hitter of sorts for you guys, or can be a guy that hits in the 9 spot and can flip the lineup for you, or can hit in the 6 spot, stuff like that. There's a lot of potential options for you, and you have a lot of spaces within your lineup that have already been filled and that are going to hopefully be the guys they were in 2025 to an extent. I don't think Cal Raleigh is going to hit 60 home runs again, but can he hit 40 to 45? Can Julio Rodriguez up his offensive production throughout the entire year? Can Randy Arozarena be the guy he was? Those are the 3 guys that are bona fide in your lineup right now. You have 3 guys that you expect good things from. But that's not enough. You need to go get another bat or 2, probably 2. And obviously, first base, like I said, is one of those holes. And to me, that has to be filled by Josh Naylor. There are other options, whether that's one of the guys out of Japan, whether that's Munetaka Murakami or Okamoto. Those are 2 options that could play third base or first base. This is sort of getting into the next hole that you're going to have, but third base and first base both are going to be holes that you have to fill. And we'll get into third base in a second. But first base, if you miss on Josh Naylor, you're going to have to go sign someone else, because I will tell you right now, if Luke Raley's the opening day first baseman, this offseason was a failure. You had a bad offseason. And there's no question about that. In terms of third base, I expect this to be Ben Williamson's job out of camp, unless Cole Emerson lights the world on fire in spring training, which is entirely possible. And if that happens, I'd expect it to be Ben Williamson and Cole Emerson mixing in both there at third base, especially at the start of the year. And if Emerson is the guy we all want him to be, then all of a sudden I think he will win that job. But if Ben Williamson can just be a league average bat, he is a very, very good third baseman, and that's everything you want from that position. He's going to be a average bat and is going to play elite defense, and that is what you need sometimes from your third baseman. That's more of a Kyle Seager type of guy. Now, Seager was a little bit better of a bat, but he was an elite defensive third baseman. And maybe that's what you're looking at a little bit with Ben Williamson. I don't want to compare him to Kyle Seager or put those expectations on his shoulders, but you know what I'm saying. You get the general idea of what I'm saying, that type of player. But Williamson is a little bit more of an average guy than a power guy, whereas Seager hit more home runs, a few more doubles, stuff like that. Moving on, I just want to talk about sort of what went wrong in the playoffs, what went wrong during the regular season, where can you improve? We're going to start with the playoffs. The biggest thing that stood out to me was you struck out a lot, you relied on home runs a lot, and you really were just missing a leadoff hitter and a guy that could turn the lineup over, and you were missing some athleticism. Those were the biggest things. There was some defensive stuff, but I think that can clean itself up naturally. I think that they just sort of happened, and it sucked that it happened on that stage, but it wasn't like a big issue. And it's the same thing with the strikeouts and the home run reliance. That worked. That made the Mariners one of the top 10-ish offenses, I want to say, in baseball. So I don't think you can really fault that approach. What went wrong in the playoffs more so was that you had 2/3 of your lineup not being able to hit. And to have that cold spell hit then is unfortunate. Because if it hadn't hit then and you'd had a little bit more of a hot streak from a couple guys, then I think you're talking about a completely different place that you were in right now. The other thing in terms of the pitching side is you're missing some middle relievers. I think it's shown pretty bright that there were only 3 to 4 guys you could really trust during the postseason. And I think on any given, really throughout the postseason, once Spire sort of started to fall, it was really 3 guys you could trust. And one of those guys was Andres Munoz, who you didn't want to throw unless it was the 9th inning, which I want to say also is at fault. And Dan Wilson was at fault for some stuff in the playoffs. The more I think back on it, the more I'm like, yeah, there were some dumb decisions. I do think he can learn from that. I was one of the biggest guys, or one of the biggest people that was a Dan Wilson hater, that was fire Dan Wilson, blah, 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 blah. I do think he needs more time. I do think he can learn. The stuff that is teachable is the stuff he needs to work on. The stuff that's not teachable, he has. And I think if we were in maybe a position where you're less competitive right now, you're talking completely differently about it. But the reality is you're in a place right now where you want to go and win the World Series, where you want to continue to win this AL West, and you want to do that perennially. And the question is, can Dan Wilson do that? Can he learn quick enough? And throughout the course of 2025, the thing for me was it didn't seem like he was really learning super quickly. It seemed like he was making the same mistakes time and time again. But I think having an offseason for him to look at that, sort of learn from some of those mistakes might help him. And it's a thing that you think you just have to assess in 2026. During the regular season, the biggest issues were third base, first base. Wherever Polanco wasn't playing, whether that was DH second base. For me, again, I think the leadoff hitter thing comes back again. Having a guy that can set the table for your best hitters, whether that's Randy, Cal, Julio, it ended up being Naylor, Polanco, stuff like that. You didn't really have a guy that was setting the table. Crawford was doing it well when he was hot. Rosarena, same thing. But neither of them were able to be truly consistent with that throughout the course of the entire season, and that ended up biting you in the butt in multiple ways. At the same time, strikeouts at the top of the lineup were an issue. You had a lot of guys in your 1 through 5 slot to the lineup that struck out a lot, and that ended up sort of, I think, being an issue for the team. It killed a lot of rallies. And instead of being able to drive runs in with those best guys, they ended up striking out in big moments. And that's, again, something you have to learn from, and something that I think will naturally improve a little bit. But getting a guy, and you can kind of see where I'm going with this, a guy that can lead off at the lineup or hit 2, and hopefully one of those guys is Naylor, but hopefully you can get a couple guys at the top of the lineup that are not going to strike out as much. They're going to be smart players. They're going to get on base better. They're going to be able to hit singles, hit some doubles. I think doubles are a huge issue for this team. This team is not very good at hitting doubles, and part of that is due to T-Mobile Park, where it's really hard to hit doubles because of the gaps, and those gaps are really hard to hit, and there's center fielders that are able to cover that ground more than there used to be. But if you're the Mariners, I think that's an area where you look and you're like, how can we improve our ability to hit doubles, our ability to hit singles, our ability to hit for a higher average? And maybe that's a guy like Luis Ariz. Maybe that's a guy like Brendan Donovan. Maybe that's a guy like Stephen Kwan. I don't know who else is going to be available, and we won't know really till the offseason begins, where there starts to be rumors, and you won't really know who is available till the end of the offseason when guys get traded or they don't. But I think that's an area where you might want to look and see if you can find some improvement. Same thing with some athleticism in the lineup. Can you get guys that are going to be able to get on base and cause havoc? And Victor Robles was a great proponent of this in 2024. Obviously, 2025 didn't go to plan, but I don't think that that's necessarily his fault. I think 2026 will be a better measure of who he is in a Mariners uniform. 2024, he was a very good player. 2025, he was injured most of the year. And when he was there, he wasn't a great guy, but he was starting to get hot right when he got hurt. And obviously, he didn't have much time to work in at-bats and all that before the postseason. And then, it's difficult to do. So I think 2026 is a real big test for him. And if I'm the Mariners, that might be an area you're looking to improve. But that said, I don't necessarily think that they will. Moving on, your biggest holes that I think you need to fill. First base is the biggest hole. That is a must fill. If you can't fill first base, you're going to have a problem. People love talking about the second base, third base hole. I actually don't have a problem with either of those. I think if you can get a guy that's sort of a utility type of guy, and this is moving into my next hole, a utility type of guy that can play in the infield, one of those positions or both of those positions, and then also play in right field, and be an athletic guy that can run and get on base and hit for higher average, I think that's probably your best avenue for a second bat after first base. That alongside a guy that can DH part of the time, because if I'm the Mariners, I'm not going into 2026 relying on Dom Canzone and Victor Robles both to be starters. And I know that works down the stretch, but if I'm the Mariners and both those guys are good next year, that's a luxury you would like to have and a problem you would want to deal with when that arrives. I don't think you want to go into the season expecting those guys to be good. And maybe they're going to, because that's often what the Mariners do. But I think that's not something you want to do. Continuing on with some holes, middle reliever and high leverage reliever, you can flip those however you want, but I think you need really one of each of them. And middle reliever might be a guy that you sort of just develop on your own. They've been good at that. But a high leverage reliever, I think you need to acquire. And they haven't really done that in the Dipoto era, where you've truly gone out and acquired a high leverage reliever. They tried to do it with Gregory Santos, and it didn't work. They tried to do it with Jimmy Garcia. It didn't really work. They tried to kind of do it with Caleb Ferguson. Didn't work, obviously. But Caleb Ferguson's also a guy that I personally would be interested in bringing back on a very cheap deal, because he's going to get a very cheap deal. People aren't going to be fans of that, but if you expect him just to be a low leverage to a mid leverage reliever, and if something nicer happens, then I think you like what you can get from them. He is a fine second left-handed reliever to have in that pen. Totally fine guy to have back there. But the expectations that were set on him were too high. He was acquired to be a high leverage reliever, and that's not what he is. So I think that people's expectations were too high. You can't expect that of a guy that's not what he does. So I would actually be interested in thinking maybe he's one of 2 or 3 relievers you acquire, and then you're talking business in that bullpen. I also think you do need to improve some depth with some bench bats. That doesn't have to be anyone huge, doesn't have to be anyone crazy, but take a flyer on a couple guys, and maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't. In terms of payroll is going to be roughly 166-ish million, 167 million. That's coming from Adam Jude, the Seattle Times. That's coming from multiple reports where it's about to be the same, roughly as what it ended, if not higher than what it was at the end of this last year. Moving on to my priorities list. Priority 1 is Josh Naylor. I mentioned that earlier. Number 2 for me is, I've talked about it multiple times already this episode, but a leadoff hitter. Guy that's athletic, guy with good bat-to-ball skills, guy that can get on base, and a guy, in my opinion, that can play infield and or outfield is obviously what you want. I think an outfielder that you can have as a right fielder, and then you can mix in at second or third base, also would be a very nice player to have, and that's a player that's hard to find, but I think it is available in a couple areas. And if you can go do it, I think that's a really exciting piece to add to this team. Third priority is high leverage reliever. I mentioned this already, but you need another guy back there, and that was apparent in the playoffs for me. And it was apparent down the stretch for me. One more high leverage reliever, and I think this bullpen is really going to look nice next year. I think Brash can be slightly better next year. I think Munoz will be slightly better. I'm not sure what we're going to get from Spire or Bizzardo, so I think getting another guy back there that you can trust would be huge. And maybe that's a guy that you're taking a little bit of a flyer on. Maybe that's a Devin Williams type of guy, where he's been very, very good in the past. He had maybe a down 2025. Maybe you're taking a flyer. You think you can fix him a little bit, and I would be all over a guy like Devin Williams. And then fourth, middle reliever. I think really this offseason, 2 relievers, 2 bats is needed. 3 bats would be fantastic. But if you get 2 really good bats, I think that changes the entire look of this lineup. In terms of some random things that I think could happen, number 1, I think it's possible the Mariners do move on from Cole Young for a guy that's controllable and proven at second base and young. That said, depending on who the guy is, I'm not sure I would like it, because I do think Cole Young can be a very, very good player, and we saw flashes of that this year. Second, I don't know how possible this is, but I do think it's possible Luis Castillo or Randy Arozarena will be traded to open payroll flexibility for this year and down the road. I don't think either of those are super likely, but if the Naylor contract's bigger than maybe you're expecting, then maybe you do see one of those guys moved on, and I think Randy would probably be the more likely of the 2. And if you do, I think you would be doing it because you also have something lined up to replace the guy with a bona fide guy. Hot takes. We're going to start cold, get hotter. Number 1, Mariners are going to F up this Naylor signing, and he will not be a Mariner in 2026. This just feels like it'd be a Mariners classic. I I don't think this is going to happen. That's why I have it in a hot takes area. But knowing the Mariners, this is possible, if not likely, and it would be a real shame and put a damper on the entire offseason. And really, it'd be difficult for people to continue to bandwagon around this team like they did at the end of this year. Second, hottest take will be Randy Arozarena will not be a Mariner in 2026. I don't know how possible this is, but knowing the Mariners and knowing payroll, it's possible, and I do think you can improve that. And if you can improve both your outfield spots, then all of a sudden maybe that's something you're talking about, especially if you can get a guy that can be there through 2027, through 2028, then maybe that would make sense. And sort of adding on to that, my hottest take is that 2/3 of the outfield will be new starters in 2026. That's talking about Randy Arozarena, and your right fielder spot will be gone and replaced. Maybe that's Steven Kwan and another guy, but I do think that's possible. I don't think it's going to happen. That's why I have it in a hot take, obviously. But I do think it is a possibility of something that could happen. Moving on, let's talk about a good offseason, a bad offseason, a meh offseason, a great offseason, and a truly dream type of offseason. Starting with the good offseason. Good offseason for me would look like you're adding Naylor and another bat or a high leverage arm, and then whatever you don't get, whether that's not, whether you can't get a second big bat or you can't get a high leverage arm, if you can get one of those, and then the other one that you don't get is going to be a lower tier, so maybe it's a big bat and a mid-leverage arm, or it's a high-leverage arm and a middle to bottom of your lineup type of bat that is still a starter. I think that's a good offseason. You add 2 bats and a bullpen arm, or you add 2 bats and a bullpen arm either way, and you're improving your bullpen and your lineup, I think, both ways. In my May offseason would be just Naylor and a sort of whelming to underwhelming bat or arm. So you get 2 players, one of them sort of to underwhelming, and it's just a little bit disappointing. Bad offseason obviously would be nothing happening, or you miss out on Naylor and any other first base option. I do think missing out on Naylor would be sort of a bad offseason in general, but if you replace it with like Pete Alonso, we're talking differently about it. That said, I do think Josh Naylor is a much better fit to this team and is much more likely. Great offseason, Josh Naylor, legit leadoff guy that can play third base, second base, or outfield, and a high leverage reliever. So you're getting 2 legit bats and a high leverage reliever, and then a dream offseason would be Josh Naylor. For me, at least, this would be Josh Naylor, Brendan Donovan, Edwin Diaz, and Luis Arraez. I'd stick Luis Arraez at DH. Donovan would be third base and right field a little bit. Naylor, obviously, first base. Edwin Diaz is another option for you to close games and be a setup guy for your bullpen. So the back of your bullpen would be Munoz, Edwin Diaz, Matt Brash, Gabe Spire, Edward Bizardo, all back there. Rotation would stay intact. Your lineup would be something like Brendan Donovan, Cal, Julio, Naylor, Randy, Luis Arraez, J.P. Crawford, Robles, Orkin, Zone in right field, and then Cole Young in the 9th spot. I think Luis Arraez is a really intriguing guy for me. I don't think he's really a guy you can play in the field, but I do think that he could be an interesting guy to have DH and then play in the field every once in a while. And he's the type of guy that I do actually think would fit the Mariners decently well. Would he fit the ballpark? I'm not so sure. Would he come here? Also not so sure. And I don't think he would cost a too crazy large amount, but a guy that doesn't strike out a lot, that's going to put the ball in play and knows how to get hits, I think would be a great addition to this lineup. Thank you guys so much for listening. This has been episode 94 of the On the Diamond Into the Deep podcast. As always, follow socials at Diamond on Deep on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, all of that good stuff. We'll be back next week with off-season plan number 1. Till then, though, thank you, everybody. Peace out. Go Mariners.